The air in the grand chamber of the galactic concordance always tasted of recycled ozone and 1,000 subtle, unidentifiable alien pheromones. To Ambassador Xyler of the Cathar, a being of scales and patient blood, it was the scent of stagnant stability. For 700 of his cycles, he had occupied his designated floating dais, and for 700 cycles, the chamber's central focus had remained unchanged. It was not the grand arbiter's luminous throne, nor the swirling star map that served as the chamber's ceiling. It was the empty seat. Crafted from a single piece of flawless, light-devouring obsidian, it was designated the seat of Terra. It was stark, unadorned, and utterly profound in its vacancy. Unlike the other daises, which hummed with personal shield emitters and translation matrices, the human seat was inert, dead, a hole in the fabric of the galaxy's governance. Today, a tedious debate droned on about revised trade tariffs on Kyler crystal shipments from the Cygnus Arm. Xyler's thoughts, as they often did, drifted to the void in their midst. He watched the newest member of the Concordance, Ambassador Lyra of the Siren Ascendancy, her multifaceted eyes flickering with impatience. The Sirens were a young species, barely a millennium into their interstellar age, all sharp angles and buzzing energy. To them, history was a data file, not a living memory. The continued allocation of prime chamber space to a defunct, mythical member species is a gross misallocation of Concordance resources. Lyra's translated voice chirped, her primary manipulators twitching with irritation as she addressed a point of order unrelated to the trade debate. She was challenging protocol, a favorite pastime of the young. The energy cost alone to maintain the seat's stasis field could power a Siren hive spire for a full cycle. A low murmur rippled through the assembled ambassadors. It was an old argument, one that resurfaced every few decades with a new, bold voice. Xyler keyed his microphone. His voice was a low, gravelly rasp that commanded attention. Ambassador Lyra, the mythical species you refer to were the first founders. It was their technological foundation upon which the Concordance was built. A foundation they abandoned, Ambassador, Lyra retorted, her antennae vibrating. They vanished eons ago. The data is fragmented, contradictory. Some tales paint them as benevolent architects, others as ruthless conquerors. Most likely, they simply succumbed to some stellar cataclysm or self-induced extinction event, as many species do. We honor a ghost, we placate a superstition. Xyler's forked tongue flickered, tasting the chamber's stale air. It is not superstition, it is caution. The Grand Arbiter, Vorlag, a being of pure, crystalline thought who communicated in harmonic chimes, finally intervened. The sound resonated directly in the minds of every being present. The seat of Terra remains. The founding covenant is immutable. This matter is not for debate. The finality in the Arbiter's chimes silenced Lyra, but her frustration was palpable, a sharp scent of bitter nectar that even Xyler's blunted senses could detect. The debate on Kyler crystals resumed, but the chamber's atmosphere had shifted. The empty seat seemed to have grown darker, its presence more absolute. It was a reminder not of what was lost, but of what might one day return. And in the oldest databanks in the most forbidden archives were the prophecies, the warnings. The legends did not speak of the humans' departure, but of their return. They said that when humanity came back to claim its seat, the galaxy would be unmade and forged anew. Xyler, who had studied the corrupted fragments of their history, did not believe they were benevolent architects. He did not believe they were conquerors either. He believed they were something far more terrifying, a trigger. Later, in the cloistered silence of the Concordance archives, Xyler guided Lyra through halls of shimmering data streams. The air here was cold, humming with the power of cryo-storage. "You think I am naive," Lyra stated, her voice devoid of its earlier sharpness. Here, surrounded by the weight of galactic history, some of her youthful certainty had eroded. "I think you are logical," Xyler corrected gently, his claws clicking softly on the polished floor. "And logic is a poor tool for understanding phenomena that defy it. Behold." He gestured to a suspended cube of light. Inside it, fragmented images flickered. A vessel, sleek and brutal in its design, unlike any known ship architecture, firing a weapon that did not unleash energy, but rather erased spacetime itself. A section of a Cathar dreadnought simply ceased to exist, its edges cauterized into non-reality. "This is from the first contact war with my own people," Xyler said, his voice low. "Before the concordance, before we knew what they were. We thought them an emerging threat. We sent a fleet of 100 capital ships to their home system to demand their submission. Only one returned, its data cores shattered, its crew driven mad by what they had seen." "Propaganda," Lyra whispered, though her multifaceted eyes were fixed on the horrifying images. "Exaggerations to enforce the old ways, to keep us clinging to these dusty traditions." "Is it?" Xyler summoned another file. This one was auditory, a sound that made Lyra's antennae curl. It was a voice, speaking a language that was all harsh consonants and soft vowels, yet the translation matrix managed to capture its essence. It was a broadcast, recorded during the humans' mysterious withdrawal from the galaxy. "We leave not in defeat but in sorrow," the voice said, imbued with a weariness that transcended species. "You are not ready. The threats you squabble over are but shadows on a cave wall. There are true monsters in the dark between galaxies, and we are the only ones who ever built a cage large enough to hold them. When we are done, we will return. Pray that you have not broken the locks on the cage by then." The recording ended, leaving an unnerving silence. "The departure proclamation," Lyra identified, her tone now academic, a shield against the unease the recording inspired. "Its authenticity has been debated for millennia." "And yet," Xyler said, turning to face her, his reptilian eyes unblinking, "the Grand Arbiter, whose consciousness was born in the era of the first founders, upholds the covenant. He maintains the seat, and he enforces the protocols." Lyra's posture straightened. "The protocols of return, more myths, vague warnings of automatic measures should a human ever be detected in concordant space." "They are not myths, young one," Xyler's voice dropped to a near hiss. "I have accessed the sub-foundational code of the concordant citadel itself. The protocols are real. They are embedded in every system, every energy conduit, every life support regulator. They are not a defense system. They are not a welcome message. The files that describe them are sealed with the highest authority, but the file designation itself is unsettling." "What is it called?" Lyra asked, a flicker of genuine curiosity breaking through her skepticism. Xyler paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "It is designated Galactic Holocaust Mechanism. The legends say that if the humans return, these ancient protocols will activate, and they will be irrevocably terrible." Their conversation was interrupted by a chime from Xyler's personal communicator. It was a summons from the Grand Arbiter himself for both of them. An unprecedented command. They made their way to the Arbiter's private spire, a towering needle of crystal that pierced the star map ceiling. Inside, the Arbiter's energy form pulsed with a soft, internal light. "You question the old ways," Vorlag's harmonic voice echoed in their minds, directed at Lyra. "You believe the past is a burden to be discarded." "I believe in efficiency, Grand Arbiter," Lyra replied, holding her ground. "I believe in a galaxy governed by the present, not by the ghosts of the past." "The ghosts of the past cast very long shadows," the Arbiter chimed. "You speak of the protocols of return as a myth. I was present when they were encoded." Xyler felt a cold dread seep into his old bones. The Arbiter rarely, if ever, spoke of his own history. "The first founders were not a single species," Vorlag continued. "They were a coalition of the galaxy's first starfaring races. The Cathar, the ancient luminous ones. The species you call humans were the last to join, and they were different. Their minds moved with a speed that was both brilliant and terrifying. They saw patterns others missed. They built things we could not comprehend. They won a war against the Void Crazers, a hive mined from beyond the galactic rim, not with fleets, but with a single, elegant equation that rewrote the laws of physics in that sector, starving them of existence." Lyra's manipulators were still. She was finally listening. "When they left, the Arbiter explained they gave us a parting gift, the designs for this citadel, the concordance itself. But the other founders, in their terror and awe, wove a poison pill into the gift. They feared humanity's return as much as they had revered their power. They built a system, a set of automated tripwires tied to human biosignatures and their unique quantum energy patterns. This system, the protocols of return, was their ultimate act of fear. They could not defeat the humans, so they sought to contain the consequences of their return. Contain how? Xyler asked, his voice a dry whisper. By severing the limb to save the body, the arbiter replied, its chimes turning somber, a funeral dirge. The protocols are not a weapon aimed at the humans. They are a weapon aimed at ourselves. They are designed to shatter our civilization, to plunge the galaxy into an isolation so profound that whatever change the humans bring would be contained to a single system. They are a self-destruct mechanism for the entire galactic network. A heavy silence filled the spire. Lyra looked shaken, her scientific mind struggling to process the sheer, suicidal madness of such a concept. Building a galactic civilization only to rig it to explode out of fear of its own creator. So the legends, the warnings, she began, are not warnings about humanity, the arbiter concluded. They are warnings about what our ancestors did in their name. The seat remains not as a memorial, but as a constant, silent plea. A prayer that they never, ever return. For if they do, our own ancient, forgotten fear will be our executioner. The weight of that revelation settled upon them as heavy as a dying star. The empty seat was not an honor. It was a hostage, a trigger. And for the first time, Lyra looked upon the long, stagnant history Xyler revered not as tradition, but as a desperate, multi-millennial effort to keep a sleeping god from waking. They left the spire in silence, the truth of their predicament a chasm between them. As they re-entered the main concourse, a siren began to blare. Not the sharp, urgent cry of a security breach, but a low, deep, resonant tone that none of them had ever heard before. It was a sound that vibrated in the bones, in the very structure of the citadel. On the great star map above, a single point of light flared, just beyond the concordance's demarcation border. A new icon appeared next to it, an icon that hadn't been seen on any display for 10,000 years. It was the archaic, angular symbol for Terra. A message scrolled across the main view screen, translated from a language so old it strained the Citadel's most powerful processors. The text was simple, direct, and utterly world-shattering. Concordance command, this is human vessel Odyssey. We are returning, prepare the seat. The galaxy held its breath. The prayer had failed. The week that followed was a masterclass in organized chaos. Fleets were mobilized, not for attack, but for observation, their commanders given contradictory orders to be prepared for anything and to do nothing. On the Concordance floor, panic blossomed into 1,000 different political strategies. Some factions advocated for a preemptive strike, arguing that triggering the protocols on their own terms was better than waiting. Others demanded the Citadel be evacuated. Most, like Lyra, were paralyzed by the sheer, history-ending gravity of the situation. Xyler, in contrast, felt a strange sense of calm. The waiting was over. The abstract fear that had haunted the Concordance for millennia was about to take physical form. He spent his time in the archives, reviewing the ancient texts one last time, not for answers, but for context. He wanted to understand the minds that had conceived of such a terrible, self-defeating strategy as the protocols of return. He found only one recurring theme, a deep, primal inferiority complex. The first founders had not felt like gods next to humanity. They had felt like insects. The human vessel, the Odyssey, did not approach through conventional hyperspace lanes. There was no ripple of space-time, no surge of exotic particles. One moment the space near the Citadel was empty. The next, the ship was simply there. It hadn't arrived, it had unfolded. The vessel was a thing of impossible beauty and terror. It was not made of metal plates and welded seams. Its hull was a seamless, shifting surface of pearlescent material that seemed to reflect not the stars around it, but stars from some other, unknown cosmos. It was shaped like a spindle, impossibly long and thin, and it remained perfectly, unnervingly still. It did not respond to any hails. The Grand Arbiter convened an emergency session. The chamber was filled to capacity, the air thick with fear. Every eye was on the main view screen showing the silent, alien ship. "They send no delegation shuttle," Lyra reported, her voice strained. Her role as a data analyst had made her the de facto expert on the unfolding situation. No communication. Scanners can get no purchase on its hull. Its energy signature is flat. It is, for all intents and purposes, a ghost. A ghost that is broadcasting a single repeating packet of data, Zyler added, bringing up a file on his personal display. It is a biological key, a DNA sequence. It matches the fragmented records we have of the Homo sapiens genome. They are not sending a delegation. The Grand Arbiter's chimes resonated with a grim finality. They are sending a single representative, as was their custom. As if on cue, a pinprick of light detached from the spindle ship. It was not a craft. It was a single humanoid figure encased in a shimmering, form-fitting field of light. It moved through the void without any visible means of propulsion, heading directly for the Concordance Citadel's primary diplomatic airlock. It passed through the Citadel's formidable outer shields as if they were mist. Defenses that could repel a nova were bypassed without effort. A collective gasp, a chorus of clicks, hisses, and whistles of shock filled the chamber. The figure proceeded through the Citadel's corridors, its path tracked by internal sensors. It ignored all automated security warnings, all sealed bulkheads, which irised open before it without command. It moved with a steady, unhurried pace, as if taking a stroll through its own home. Finally, the massive bronze doors to the grand chamber hissed open. The being that stood there was underwhelming. It was bipedal, bilaterally symmetrical, and small, barely 2 Cathar meters tall. It wore a simple, dark gray uniform with no insignia. Its skin was pale, its head covered in dark hair. The face was a collection of soft tissues, its expression unreadable, placid. It was this placidity that was the most terrifying thing of all. In a room of beings openly broadcasting their fear and anxiety, the human was a void. Its eyes, 2 dark circles, scanned the chamber, taking in the assembled ambassadors of 100 worlds. The gaze lingered for a second on Zyler, then on Lyra, before finally settling on the empty obsidian seat. Without a word, it walked down the central aisle, its soft-soled boots making no sound on the polished floor. The ambassadors on their daises recoiled as it passed, a wave of instinctual fear rippling through the room. The human reached the seat of Terra. It ran a single, 5-fingered hand over the cold, black surface. Then, with a quiet sigh that was picked up by every audio sensor in the room, it sat down. For a moment, nothing happened. The galaxy held its collective breath. A fragile, foolish hope began to bloom in the chamber. Perhaps the legends were wrong. Perhaps the protocols were defunct. Then it began. A low hum, so deep it was felt more than heard, vibrated through the Citadel. The lights flickered, turning a blood red. A synthesized voice, cold and without emotion, spoke from the Citadel's core programming, a voice that had been silent for 10,000 years. Human biosignature confirmed. Quantum energy signature confirmed. Seat of Terra occupied. Activating Covenant of Solitude. Protocols of galactic return engaged. T-10-9. No, the Grand Arbiter's chime was a cry of pure anguish. "What is the Covenant of Solitude?" Lyra yelled, her multifaceted eyes wide with terror. The Arbiter's voice was a frantic storm in their minds. The final protocol, the severance. They didn't just want to contain a system, they wanted to contain information itself. It's going to sever every hyperspace lane, collapse every wormhole gate, and erect a communication blackout around every star system in the galaxy. 3, 2, 1. The great star map on the ceiling did not explode. It simply went dark. Every single glowing line that represented a trade route, a communication channel, a hyperspace lane, vanished in an instant. The view screen showing the human ship switched to static, then to a view of the local system, now utterly, terrifyingly alone. Across the entire galaxy, trillions of beings on thousands of worlds were suddenly cut off. Ships in mid-jump were annihilated, their reality ceasing to exist as the tunnels they traveled collapsed. The intricate gossamer web of galactic civilization, the work of millennia, was not just torn, it was erased. The grand chamber erupted into pure animal panic. Ambassadors screamed, some trying to flee, others collapsing in shock. Their worlds were now islands, their families and peoples unreachable, perhaps forever. It was a civilization-level stroke, an induced coma on a galactic scale. Through it all, the human sat in his obsidian chair. He had not moved. He did not seem surprised. He watched the chaos unfold around him, and on his placid face, for the first time, an emotion appeared. It was not triumph, it was not anger. It was a profound, heartbreaking pity. Xyler did not panic. His Cathar discipline, honed over centuries, took hold. He watched the unfolding catastrophe with a historian's detached horror. He saw the Siren delegation frantically trying to open a communications channel, their technicians chittering in frustration as they encountered a wall of absolute, impenetrable silence. He saw the gelatinous form of the Poldorian ambassador dissolve into a quivering puddle of despair. This was it, the galactic holocaust mechanism, not a weapon of fire and death, but of silence and isolation, a death by 1,000 lonely years. The human, who had yet to speak a word, finally rose from the seat. The chamber fell silent, every eye drawn to him. He looked at the chaos, at the weeping, screaming ambassadors who represented the pinnacle of galactic power, and his expression of pity deepened. "My name is Ilias," he said. His voice was calm, clear, and resonated without any visible amplification. The translation matrix worked perfectly, the ancient language flawlessly rendered. "I am the designated emissary of Terra." "You," shrieked Lyra, her body trembling with a mixture of rage and terror. "You did this? You knew this would happen?" Ilias' gaze softened as he looked at her. "No, you did this. Or rather, your ancestors did. We did not build this cage, ambassador. We were merely the key it was designed to fit. This protocol, this covenant of solitude, was an automated system of your own making. We had hoped you would have dismantled it in the intervening millennia. We hoped you had outgrown your fear." His words cut through the panic, replacing it with a stunned, horrified understanding. The blame shifted. The monster was not the human, but their own shared past. They were not victims of an attack. They were victims of their own forgotten, institutionalized terror. "Why return?" Xyler asked, his voice a dry rasp. "Why risk this if you knew it was a possibility?" "Because it was no longer a possibility. It was a certainty," Ilias replied, turning to the old Cathar. "The systems holding the Void Crazers at bay were failing, not because of a flaw in their design, but because of external, directed tampering. Someone, or something, is trying to break the locks on the cage. We had to return to reinforce them. We had to risk triggering your contingency, because the alternative was the consumption of this entire galaxy by horrors you cannot imagine." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "We had hoped to arrive, explain the situation, and work with you to disarm this system. But the tampering accelerated. We had no more time. We had to act." The silence that followed was different. It was the silence of minds grappling with a scale of reality they had never considered. They had been arguing over trade tariffs while cosmic monsters clawed at the walls of their universe. "So we are doomed," a voice cried out from the crowd. "Isolated, left to wither and die in our own star systems while you fight your secret war." Ilias shook his head slowly. "Isolation is a matter of perspective." He raised his hand, and a small, intricate device materialized in his palm, coalescing from the air itself. It glowed with a soft, white light. "The Concordance Network was built on principles of linear FTL travel," Ilias explained, his voice taking on the tone of a patient teacher. "Jumping from point to point. A very robust but primitive system, like sending messages by runner from one village to another. When the paths between villages are cut, communication ceases." He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the assembled species. "Humanity no longer uses paths. We learn to reshape the paper the map is drawn on." He closed his hand, and outside the citadel in the cold, silent void, reality buckled. From the observation domes, they watched it happen. A new light bloomed in the darkness. It was not a ship. It was a web. A lattice of incandescent, silver threads that erupted into being not just in their system, but, according to the Citadel's deep-range passive sensors, in every single system in the galaxy simultaneously. It was a network that did not traverse space but existed within its very fabric, a nervous system for the cosmos itself. The main viewscreen, once dark, flickered to life. It showed not one system but thousands: a Siren hive spire, a Cathar orbital shipyard, the swirling methane seas of Poldor, all in real time. A cacophony of voices erupted from the communication system as 1,000,000,000,000 severed connections were re-established at once. The ambassadors stared, dumbfounded. The galactic holocaust mechanism, The ultimate act of their ancestors, the cataclysm that had shattered their civilization just minutes ago, had been rendered obsolete. Not bypassed, not repaired. Replaced. By a single gesture from a single being. The combined engineering knowledge of the entire concordance, the work of 1,000 species over 10,000 years, could not have conceived of such a thing, let alone built it. To them it was magic, divinity. Lyra, the scientist, the pragmatist, was on her knees, her multifaceted eyes leaking a thin, viscous fluid. She was looking at the new network with the expression of a cave dweller seeing fire for the first time. The gap in understanding was so vast it was spiritual. "How?" she whispered, the single word a vessel for the awe and terror of every being in the room. Elias looked at her, and his expression was no longer one of pity. It was one of welcome. "We had a lot of time to study," he said simply. "Now the real work begins. The locks on the cage are weakening, and the concordance has just been drafted into the war to maintain them. The age of squabbling over trade routes is over. The age of survival has begun." He gestured towards the new, impossibly complex network of light that now united their galaxy. "Welcome to the galactic community, Ambassador. The real one." Xyler looked from the human to the awestruck faces of his colleagues. He thought of the prophecy. The galaxy would be unmade and forged anew. He had always assumed it was a metaphor for destruction and conquest. He now understood it was a literal description of events. In the span of a single hour, their entire conception of reality, technology, and their place in the universe had been demolished and rebuilt into something larger, more terrifying, and more magnificent than they could have ever imagined. They were children. They were children in the stars who had just been told by a long-lost parent that the night was full of real monsters, but that they no longer had to face it alone. The seat of solitude was empty no longer, and the silence it had held for so long had been replaced by the roar of a new, and infinitely more dangerous, dawn. The days that followed the great severance and the instantaneous restoration were a blur of frantic education. The grand chamber of the concordance transformed from a hall of debate into a lecture theater, and its sole teacher was Elias. He did not command or dictate. He simply answered questions, his patience seemingly infinite. He explained that after their departure, humanity had not simply expanded outwards, but inwards, downwards, and sideways through the dimensional strata of reality. They had discovered that what the concordance races perceived as the universe was but a single, stable membrane in a roiling ocean of chaotic, predatory existences. The void crazers had been just one, relatively simple example. "Think of your FTL drives," Elias explained one morning, projecting a shimmering, multi-layered diagram in the center of the room. "You create a tunnel through a lower energy dimension to bypass the limitations of light speed. It is effective, but it is like a child digging in the sand. You are unaware of the tides, the pressure changes, the deep-sea leviathans swimming just beneath your feet. You have been extraordinarily lucky that none of them have noticed you." The new network, he called it the subspace manifold, was not a communication or travel grid. It was a reinforcement of the universal membrane itself, a way to monitor and manage the pressure from other realities. It was an emergency response system on a cosmological scale. Lyra, her skepticism replaced by a fervent, all-consuming desire for knowledge, became his most dedicated student. "The energy requirements," she buzzed one day, her manipulators flying across a data slate. "To power such a manifold across 100 billion stars, it would require the output of 1,000 supernovas per second. It's not possible." "You are still thinking in terms of energy generation," Elias replied calmly. "You see a river and think of building a water wheel. We learn to redirect the river's source. The manifold does not consume power. It is woven from the zero-point energy of spacetime itself. It is a self-sustaining knot in the fabric of reality." His every explanation only served to highlight the chasm between them. The concordance races had spent millennia mastering the atom. Humanity had spent the same time mastering reality itself. Xyler found himself in a new role. While Lyra and the other scientists and engineers flocked to Elias, the politicians and leaders came to the old Cathar. They were terrified. Their power, their fleets, their economic might, it was all rendered meaningless. They were no longer the masters of their own destiny. "He speaks to us as if we are students," fumed the Gromlord of the Artak hegemony, a being of living rock and molten fury. He does not ask for our consent. He has conscripted us into a war we did not know existed. Did you ask for the consent of the microbes on your skin before you washed your hands? Xyler responded, his voice weary. To them, it was an apocalypse. To you, it was simple hygiene. We must accept our new scale in the universe. The psychological impact was devastating. Species that had prided themselves on their military prowess saw their mightiest dreadnoughts as little more than quaint historical artifacts. Civilizations built on economic dominance realized their entire galactic economy was a child's game of trading beads. Elias was not oblivious to this. One cycle, he sought out Xyler in the archives, the one place in the Citadel that still felt like a sanctuary of the old ways. Your people are struggling to adapt, Elias observed, his placid expression holding a hint of empathy. He stood before a flickering image of an ancient Cathar city. We have defined ourselves by our achievements, Xyler said. You have shown us that our greatest achievements are but infantile scribbles next to your casual conversation. That was never our intention, Elias said. But the threat is real, Ambassador, and it is coming. The tampering we detected was not subtle. It was a brute force attempt to shatter the dimensional locks. The entity responsible is not a void crazer. It is something older, something that remembers a time before stars. We call them the First Shadow. Elias gestured, and the archive image was replaced by a dark, swirling vortex of non-light. It was a sensor recording from the galactic rim. From the vortex, a shape emerged. It was not a ship. It was a creature, a being of twisted spacetime and coherent darkness, larger than a nebula. As it moved, stars in its path did not explode. They were unwritten from existence. That is a scout, Elias said quietly. One of many. They are testing the boundaries. The main swarm will follow. Xyler felt a chill that had nothing to do with the archive's cold air. This was the monster humanity had caged. This was the truth behind their millennia-long absence. They hadn't abandoned the galaxy. They had been standing guard on its outer walls. What do you want from us? Xyler asked, his voice raw. We have nothing to offer. Our weapons are useless. Our technology is a joke. You have worlds, Elias said, his gaze intense. You have minds, you have perspectives. We learned much while we were away, but we also grew singular, homogenized in our purpose. We have forgotten how to be diverse. We need the chaotic, brilliant, desperate ingenuity of younger races. We do not need you to build weapons to fight the shadow. We need you to build societies that are worth saving. We need you to dream of futures that are not endless war. We will hold the line. You must give us a reason to. It was the most profound paradigm shift Xyler had ever experienced. Humanity was not offering conquest. It was offering a partnership, but not between equals in power. It was the partnership between a shield and the heart it protects. They were not being asked to fight. They were being asked to live, with more purpose and creativity than ever before, to become the repository of everything the First Shadow sought to destroy. The Grand Concordance was quietly dissolved. In its place, a new body was formed, the Galactic Coalition. Its purpose was not trade or territory, but the curation and advancement of life, culture, and knowledge. The empty obsidian seat was removed, replaced by a simple, glowing node of the manifold, from which Elias or other humans could communicate. It was no longer a seat of power, but a conduit for guidance. Lyra became the first director of the Coalition's primary research initiative, the Elias Project. Its goal was not to replicate human technology, an impossible task, but to understand the fundamental principles behind it, to elevate the science of all the Coalition races over the next 10,000 years. Her frantic energy had found its ultimate focus. She was no longer trying to climb a mountain, she was learning how to comprehend the sky. Xyler returned to the archives, but his work was no longer about preserving the past. It was about reframing it. He began the monumental task of writing the true history of the galaxy, a history that did not begin with the Concordance, but with humanity's lonely, selfless vigil. One evening, he stood in the observation dome, looking out at the silver web of the manifold that now crisscrossed the heavens. It was beautiful, a testament to a power he would never fully understand. The galaxy was no longer the same. The prophecy had been fulfilled, but it was not an end. It was a beginning, a much larger, much more dangerous, and much more meaningful one. Lyra joined him, her usual buzz of energy replaced by a quiet reverence. They stood in silence for a long time, two beings from different worlds bound by a shared, shattering revelation. "Do you think we can do it?" she asked, her voice soft. "Give them a reason." Xyler looked at the new stars in their sky, the silver threads of the human network. He thought of the terrible, sleeping things in the dark and the quiet, weary guardians who stood between them and the light. He felt the weight of his 700 cycles, but for the first time, it felt not like a burden but a foundation. "They held the line for 10,000 years alone," he rasped. "I think with their help, we can learn to be a light bright enough to be worth protecting." The old fear was gone, replaced by a daunting, but not unwelcome, sense of purpose. The galaxy was larger than they had ever dreamed, and their place in it was smaller than they had ever imagined. But for the first time, it felt like they were truly a part of it all. No longer children, but apprentices, ready to learn from the masters who had finally, after so long, come home.